Hello and welcome. We're pleased you can join us today for the launch of the International Energy Agency's Energy Technology Perspectives 2024, our flagship technology publication, which in this edition focuses on the global manufacturing and trade of clean energy technologies. I'm Jethro Mullen, head of the IEA's communications team, and I'm joined today by IEA Executive Director, Dr. Fatih Birol, by our Chief Technology Officer, Timur Gül, and by one of the lead authors of the report, Araceli Fernandez. Before Dr. Birol, Timur and Araceli discuss the key findings, I'd like to note that the entire report is free to read and download on our website, including a series of interactive tools and a data explorer that are well worth digging into. So during today's event, Dr. Birol will make some opening remarks, and then Timur will present the key findings of the report. We'll then take some questions from journalists. For the journalists taking part in this press webinar, we invite you to send your questions via the Q&A function in the Zoom. You can do this at any point during the presentation, and we'll also take a 2-minute break right after the presentation for you to enter your questions. And with that, I'll hand over to our Executive Director, Dr. Birol.
Thank you very much, Jethro. Greetings, dear colleagues, dear friends from the International Energy Agency headquarters in Paris. We are yet once again in front of you to present you another groundbreaking report from the IEA. It is our Energy Technology Perspectives report, 2024 edition. As I call it, it is the world's guidebook for clean energy technology. We need such a guidebook more than ever, as the clean energy technologies are moving fast and in a dynamic way. And I am thankful to Dr. Gül, who is our Chief Technology Officer, Araceli, thank you very much, Araceli, and the entire the ETP team, coming out with such a unique report. In this report, we look at the clean energy technologies, their manufacturing perspectives, how much they will play a role in the global economy in terms of their market size. Is it an important or not important sector? And the topic of today is the trade. We look at these issues in this report. Dear colleagues, some of you may know or could remember that more than 3 years ago, looking at the numbers, in the energy numbers, investment numbers, projects around the world, country by country, we said, a daring statement, we said, a global clean energy economy is emerging. And where we are today, we see that it is really taking place as a result of the penetration of solar power, wind, electric cars, and other clean energy technologies. And it is growing across the world, which is very important for energy security, for economy, and also addressing our climate challenges. We also see that as the cost competitiveness of the clean energy technologies improve almost by day, many countries are pushing these technologies as a part of their industrial strategy as well. So our report is a very good testimony of the fact that IEA was saying since some time, which is the energy, industry, and trade policies are getting more and more interwoven. Countries who are able to harmonize these three policies, having right strategies for three of them, will be definitely the beneficiary in terms of their economic performance. And in this report, we see that there are many factors which go in parallel for energy, industry, and trade policies, but there are some areas where governments have to make hard choices, hard decisions. And there are some questions on the table that the governments and also industry need to answer, because we see there is a growing and there will be even more intense competition among the countries when it comes to clean energy manufacturing. So we are seeing, and we will see even more, the role of trade policies, how far the trade barriers could go up, should go up, and what are the implications of this to the country that puts the barriers. What are the implications for clean energy transitions? We are analyzing these questions in this report, and we are also looking whether or not the smaller economies, bigger size but with the economies, smaller economies, are they going to lose out from this competition between the major economies when it comes to clean energy manufacturing? So what we have done in this, once again, in my view, a groundbreaking report that will be a reference book for countries, governments, industries, many years to come. We look at the 6 top clean energy technologies. What are those? Solar PV, wind, electric cars, electrolysers, batteries, and heat pumps. So these top 6 technologies, and we wanted to see how the manufacturing of these technologies will look like in the future, focusing on the next 10 years. Second, what will be the market size, market value of these technologies in the next 10 years, and what are the possible trade flows. And we look at it for the world, but we focus first on the, or mainly I should say, 4 major economies: United States, China, Europe, and India. But you will see in our report, we also look at the emerging and developing countries. What are the opportunities for those countries depending on their parameters? We look at the, I think if I am not wrong, about 60 parameters, yes, 60 parameters, ranging from their business environment, their resource endowment, their current energy infrastructure, the grids, gas pipelines, whether or not they have access to port. So we look at all of these, as my colleague Araceli mentioned, about 60 indicators, and looking at the current clean energy manufacturing appetite around the world, what could be some of the opportunities for those countries to focus on a few of these clean energy supply chains. And dear colleagues, before I pass the floor to, or the word to Dr. Gül, who was, who led this very important project, I want to share with you a couple of numbers so that we understand why it is groundbreaking, why, in my view, any serious policymaker needs to pay attention to these numbers. First of all, the market size, the market value of the these 6 important clean energy technologies. 2015, some 10 years ago, the value, the market value of these 6 technologies were about $200 billion dollars, and today they are over 700 billion US dollars in the tripling of its market value. And we expect, with the current speed, with the current policies, not even the acceleration of the policies, we expect in the 2035, 10 years from now, they will reach to 2.1 trillion US dollars. So this is what does $2.1 trillion mean? In order to, since many of our I guess viewers are the energy background or interest in energy issues, this is about $2 trillion. It means it is more or less equal to the market size of the crude oil, global crude oil market value today. So in 2035, they are equal to the current crude oil market we have. And in terms of trade, we expect that the trade will also grow substantially, tripling between now and 2035, getting closer to 600 billion US dollars. And again, comparing with the knowns today to us, such as natural gas markets, it is 50% higher than the trade of natural gas today. So the clean energy technology, the trade in 2035, 50% higher than what we have for natural gas today. Now, dear colleagues, there are many countries who play a very important role here, but I have to underline the role of China. When you look at the numbers, there is an outsized role of China. China has started this earlier than many other countries. It was an industrial policy of China, and today, when we look at the 6 technologies we are talking about, China's share is on average 70% of the manufacturing of these 6 technologies are taking place in China. This is, of course, a very big dominance in all of them. I will not give you too much detail, but one thing attracted my attention in the report, one number. It's about PV, of course. PV, when we say PV, China is by far the leader of the world. But a new facility being built in China, in one of the provinces, Shaanxi province, is a huge facility of PV. It is the capacity of this new facility is enough to manufacture enough modules, PV modules, to cover the entire solar PV demand of European Union. So one facility manufacturing of the modules is enough to meet the European Union PV demand. Just to give you the order of magnitude we are talking about. So of course other countries are coming strongly. The United States making major steps forward in terms of the especially getting a big boost from the Inflation Reduction Act. The India with the new incentives India is putting for the clean energy manufacturing from solar to others, and I am certain that the European Union will soon come up with a similar package to push further the clean energy manufacturing. But China will dominate the trade, at least in the next 10 years. Again, one number I believe very important to again put the things in a context. The amount of the revenues China will have from exporting this clean energy goods by 2035, the amount of export revenues in 2035 is higher than today's oil export revenues of top two countries, namely Saudi Arabia plus United Arab Emirates put together. It shows how the global trade, in which direction the global trade is moving, more technology and less commodities. So China's dominance and China's services are important here, but also what I believe in the energy world, whatever the technology, whatever the fuel is, the magic word is diversification. The more you have diversification, the better it is for the security, for the prosperity of the people. And in addition to four countries, as I mentioned, my colleagues look at the opportunities for the emerging and developing countries. What kind of opportunities are there for which of these technologies we wanted to bring to the attention of the colleagues. So to sum up, this report, dear colleagues, looks at the manufacturing and trade of the clean energy technologies, the value, the scale, and it is very clear that it will multiply. The value and the scale will multiply. Trade will be a very important part of the future discussion. And in this report, I told you what we did, but I want to tell you also what we didn't do. We didn't make any prescription for the countries, do this, do that when it comes to trade policies. It is up to countries to decide what is best for them. In some cases, there are legitimate grounds that the countries put some trade policies to protect their domestic manufacturing, but what are the consequences of that in terms of clean energy transition, in terms of overall their trade policies is something those countries to decide. We just wanted to put the facts on the table, and here, before I give the floor to my colleague Dr. Gül, may I also thank him and the RSL, the entire team for this groundbreaking report. Over to you, please, Timo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Birol, Executive Director. Many thanks for the kind introduction and indeed kind words. Welcome also from my end to this launch event for the 2024 edition of the IEA's Technology Flagship Energy Technology Perspectives publication. As the Executive Director already mentioned, this report is about the future of manufacturing and trade. And we looked in particular at 6 important clean energy technologies. He already mentioned them: solar PV, wind, electric cars and batteries, electrolysers and heat pumps. But we also looked at key materials that you use in order to produce them, like steel and aluminium, as well as the role of ammonia. So a lot of different angles to the analysis in this year's report. What we asked ourselves in this report is how industrial and trade policies that are being shaped up around the world might affect the future of manufacturing and trade of these commodities. And just to underline, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first such analysis of its kind, and we do hope that it's useful for decision makers out there. And we do believe so, in fact. Let me now take you through the main findings, starting with a look at the market opportunity for clean energy technologies that the Executive Director already referred to. It is very easy here to get lost in the billions and trillions, but I think the main message you need to retain here is that clean technologies are no longer a niche market, nor just a climate story. They now constitute a sizable market and are an important industrial opportunity. When you look back 10 years, back in roughly not even 10 years, back in 2015, at the time, electric vehicle sales were only around 1% of new car sales, compared with around 20% that we are seeing today. Solar PV capacity additions were only 10% of what we expect for this year, for 2024. And at that time, the sales of our 6 key technologies had a market value of just under $200 billion. This figure is now more than $700 billion. When you look at countries, China is far and away the main market here. Around 60% of the global market value comes from sales of these technologies in China. This is very obvious, very simple, because just last year, nearly 40% of all cars sold in China were electric, and China installed 60% more renewable capacity than the rest of the world together. So it is very evident where these big market values are coming from. The market value on our analysis is set to grow further, even in our somewhat more conservative way of looking at the future that reflects current policy settings only. The market value rises to more than $2 trillion by the year 2035, which is, as the executive director already mentioned, close to the average value of the global oil market in recent years. Of course, this is a different commodity. We understand that, but hopefully this gives you a good indication of the significance of the clean technology market. There is a slight shift here in markets. As you see, China remains the largest market by value, but that of the United States and the European Union is catching up on the basis of the energy policies that are currently on the books in these countries. Now, where there is a market and where there is a firm expectation of growth, there are, of course, companies that are willing to invest. Clean technology manufacturing, in our analysis, has been drawing in large amounts of investment, $235 billion just last year, which was 50% more than in 2022. The outcome of this recent wave of investments, in my view, is very, very impressive. You see here solar PV and its components on the screen as an example. We count over 700 factories, mostly located in China, India, and Southeast Asia, as well as in the United States and Europe. A very similar picture emerges when you look at wind, nearly 500 factories operating worldwide, with some notable manufacturing capacity here also located in Latin America. And finally, we count around 1,600 factories that can build electric vehicles and certainly batteries and its components. So when you take all this together and look at the other technologies too, there are now several thousand manufacturing facilities for clean technologies in operation in almost 60 countries around the world. Very huge number. A very huge number on the one hand, but we also find some bitter realities. For example, there's not even a handful of facilities in the whole continent of Africa, meaning that Africa is just not reaping the economic and job benefits that come with clean technology manufacturing. And I will come back to this later in the presentation. And we find, of course, that not every factory is the same, neither in terms of the quality at which they produce, nor in terms of the size of their output. The truth here is, and the executive director mentioned that already, that clean technology manufacturing is highly concentrated geographically. China alone here accounts for around 70% of the global manufacturing output value. And if you look upstream to components like cathodes and anodes for batteries and wafers and polysilicon for solar PV modules, this share can actually be up to 97%. So huge concentration here. The outside role of China in clean tech manufacturing can actually be very well illustrated by the one single factory that the executive director mentioned. The one under construction in Shanxi province would alone be capable of covering all of the demand of the European Union today. With this concentrated picture for supply and at the same time a more dispersed picture for demand, it's immediately clear why trade is important for clean energy technologies. What we have analyzed is maritime trade routes in a lot of detail, country by country and port by port. And what we find is that trade mostly flows from east to west, from China and Southeast Asia to Europe. More than half of global clean technology trade actually passes through the Strait of Malacca, which is one of the busiest shipping routes in the world. Worth to note here, and just to put this in perspective, that this dependency on a single maritime choke point is much larger than the share of fossil fuel seaborne trade that passes through the Strait of Hormuz, which is around 20%. Of course, energy security implications are different for when it comes to potential disruption, but it is worth noting nonetheless. Now, the value of trade in clean energy technologies today is around $200 billion. This is not a number, by the way, that you get off the shelf as a first number that we have been able to compile. Around 80% here is in batteries and EVs, as well as solar PV of that $200 billion. In a context of global international good trade, this is a small value. Fossil fuels make up for a larger share at around 10%, very similar to the trade in food and food products. What we have done for our analysis in trying to understand how clean technology trade will develop is we looked in detail at all the relevant policies that have been implemented around the world. Of course, industrial policies on the one hand to support domestic manufacturing, but also the import tariffs, the duties, and the many other trade policy instruments that have been put in place in recent years. Not making a judgment, just understanding the impacts. And what we find here is that despite all these various measures that have been implemented, the value of trade in clean energy technologies is set to triple to reach almost 600 billion by the year 2035, roughly 50% more than the total value of global natural gas trade today, again, just to understand the significance. This value can be even higher, of course, if the transition to clean energy goes faster than under current policy settings, and of course, depending on how industrial and trade policies will develop. But what is important to keep in mind is when you look at the value of fossil fuel trade, this value is set to go a very different pathway. It is set to decline within the next 10 years, somewhat modestly under current policy settings, but of course, potentially faster, depending on how fast clean energy technology deployment plays out moving forward. Now, the way that individual countries will participate in the trade of clean energy technologies will very much depend on their energy, industrial, and trade policies that they are putting in place. China is today the world's largest importer of fossil fuels, followed by the European Union, whereas the United States is a net exporter of fossil fuels. All these regions have energy policies in place to support clean technology deployment, and all are major manufacturing hubs in terms of trade in clean technologies. However, the picture is much more nuanced. China exports clean technologies today that are worth around $100 billion US. And when you look at China's outsized role in clean technology manufacturing, then this means that under current policy settings, its exports will grow to around $340 billion US within the next 10 years, roughly equivalent to the value of oil exports of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates combined as they are projected for this year, for 2024. The European Union here remains a net importer for both fossil fuels and clean technologies under current policy settings, but the balance shifts significantly away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy technologies. This may look like a negative outcome from the perspective of industrial policy goals, but from the perspective of energy policy, the shift to importing a higher share of technologies has actually positive impacts on energy resilience. To give an example here, a single journey by a large container ship filled with solar PV modules can provide the means to generate electricity equivalent to what can be generated from natural gas shipped in more than 50 large LNG tankers or more than 100 large ships carrying coal. So one solar PV module ship equivalent to 50 large LNG tankers and more than 100 large ships carrying coal. Finally, here just looking at the United States, where the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law are set to boost domestic manufacturing on the one hand. On the other hand, its existing preferential trade agreements like the USMCA provide a strong opportunity for the US to trade. Now, the future of global trade in clean technologies is closely linked to industrial competitiveness as well as the effectiveness of industrial policies. The way we see these factors playing out at the moment, and having analyzed the competitiveness of different industries, different countries, as well as all these industrial policies, the way we see these factors playing out can well be illustrated by two of the prominent examples in clean tech, solar PV and batteries. As I mentioned earlier, China is today far and away the largest producer of solar PV modules and battery cells. For solar PV in particular, production last year was actually above what the market could absorb, and so inventories were built up. But several countries have been working up industrial strategies to boost domestic production. This includes the US Inflation Reduction Act that I already mentioned, of course, India's production-linked incentive scheme, the EU's Net Zero Industry Act, as well as many others like the Made in Canada plan, Future Made in Australia, Malaysia's new Industrial Master Plan 2030, or Egypt's National Automotive Industry Development Program. The impact of these industrial strategies can be very pronounced. The US Inflation Reduction Act, for example, makes it cheaper for companies to produce solar PV modules and battery cells in the United States than elsewhere in this world. In India and in parts of Southeast Asia, production costs are already quite close to those of China. So even some light touch and focused policy measures can serve to boost quality of the products and domestic production. The result is therefore that we see under current policy settings and with the announced manufacturing capacity that China's share of global solar PV and batteries production remains larger than any other country in the next 10 years. But at the same time, other countries are likely to catch up significantly if their plans materialize. Now, exactly how the roles of various countries develop will in no small parts here depend on the pace of the clean energy transition, of course. The faster the transition and whatever the motivation here, it can be climate reasons, it can be for the emerging economic opportunities with clean tech manufacturing. So the faster the transition, the larger the global market for these technologies, which would provide more opportunities for China to utilize its existing and planned manufacturing capacity and provide more opportunities for new market entrants as well. Now, I said that already at the outset, and our executive director mentioned it as well. In terms of emerging and developing countries, economies, there are only very few clean technology manufacturing facilities in operation in Latin America, in Africa, and in Southeast Asia. And so these countries today account for less than 5% of the value that is generated from clean technology manufacturing. The outlook here is not very promising either. Less than 5% of the pipeline of announced capacity globally to 2030 is actually in these countries. It can be much lower. In many cases, it's less than 2%. So we really have no basis at this point in time to expect meaningful improvements for now. The role of emerging and developing economies in clean technology supply chains today is often limited primarily to the supply of raw materials, the very initial step of clean technology supply chains. Take copper for as an example, which is essential for the energy transition, of course, for example, for electric motors, for transmission and distribution infrastructure, etc. Nearly half of global copper mineral exports are coming from Latin America, or think of bauxite here, for which one single country in West Africa, Guinea, accounts for more than half of global exports, which are then turned into the higher value product of aluminium elsewhere in other countries. We believe this is not the right way of going. It's not fair. Just and people-centered transition require enabling emerging and developing economies to move up the value chain so that they can better benefit from the opportunities of the new clean energy economy. We therefore identified around 60 factors. We work to identify opportunities by collecting country-by-country data across over 60 different indicators. The executive director already referred to it. We looked at the business environment. We looked at infrastructure for energy and transport, so not only distribution grids, transmission grids, but also ports, roads, etc. We looked at resource availability and domestic market value. All this in order to understand the starting point of each country, their relative strength today as they are, and the current barriers to investment. And we developed a bespoke analysis here to explore the future potential of these countries, a high potential case, as we called it, to see what these countries could potentially be achieving. You will find the full results in our report, but I just wanted to share with you a few illustrative examples. Latin America, for example, is well known for its abundant renewable energy and mineral resources, but some countries in Latin America hold additional relevant assets already today. This is not about being able to develop it in the future. Other countries can do, but they have it already today, such as a skilled workforce, for example, which is important for battery and wind manufacturing, for example. Brazil here is already a significant player in wind turbine manufacturing today and has strong growth potential in the medium term. The proximity to rich mineral deposits like lithium also makes the manufacturing of batteries and their components a viable prospect in Latin America. And many countries in the region import nitrogen fertilizers today, where our analysis actually suggests that here the region could produce actually all its nitrogen fertilizer needs itself domestically and become a significant exporter of ammonia thanks to its renewable resources moving forward. Moving to Africa now, we find a very promising starting point for EME manufacturing, building on the existing car manufacturing operations in North Africa and with also the investments that is underway, for example, in Morocco. We can also see a strong potential to step up the value chain in energy-intensive industries, building on the continent's iron ore deposits and its low-cost renewable energy resources. Such iron ore, just to explain that a bit, is exported with little processing and value addition today, but if countries in Africa have access to strategic partnerships with other countries, this could help them upgrade their iron ore using renewable electricity and hydrogen, and then export the resulting iron to countries where it's most costly to do so, and more costly to produce them, and otherwise, of course, use them domestically. And finally, just a word on Southeast Asia. Several countries here are already producing clean energy technologies, such as Vietnam, such as Malaysia. So the potential to go further here is somewhat easier to see even in the short term. Our analysis suggests that the region could become one of the cheapest places in the world to produce polysilicon and wafers that you use for PV modules within the next 10 years and take a larger share of the global market. We also believe that Southeast Asia, or we find in our analysis, that the region could produce many more electric vehicles than the roughly 40,000 that it is producing today and export them to other markets. These are just a couple of illustrative examples from our analysis. And of course, we acknowledge perfectly that countries may choose to go differently, but we do see many potential avenues here for emerging and developing economies to move up the value chain and reap the socio-economic benefits of clean technologies and materials. And we hope that the more than 60 indicators that we developed and our analysis, of course, will be a helpful guide to the decision making. Let me now close by returning briefly to the theme that the Executive Director already raised in his opening remarks, somewhat these tensions and trade-offs that we see between the goals of energy, industrial and trade policies, which are increasingly interwoven, as the Executive Director mentioned. This is the terrain that government industrial strategies have to navigate, and there's no single or simple answer and approach to just how these tensions and trade-offs in these areas can be addressed. It will, though, require that industrial policies are closely monitored and be amendable to course correction in order to cultivate and maintain competitiveness and innovation moving forward. Trade policy measures will, of course, need to be designed carefully if they're to support such goals. With that, I would like to leave it here. Thank you all very much for listening, the Executive Director, to the guidance in this particular work, and I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Timur, our Chief Energy Technology Officer, for the presentation. We now have time, as Timur mentioned, to take some questions from journalists. So we invite the journalists in attendance to send your questions through the Q&A function of the Zoom if you haven't done so already. And please mention your media outlet along with your question. We'll take a 2-minute break to give you a chance to send your questions. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back. So thank you very much for the questions so far. We're going to get through as many of them as we can, starting with quite a topical one. And this one is about the EV tariffs, the electric vehicle tariffs. So how do you expect the EU's recently adopted tariffs on imports of EVs from China to impact the European EV market? And then we have one on the implications for Europe more broadly. So based on this new analysis, what are the implications for European industries of the global shift towards manufacturing and trade of clean energy technologies? And then we also have one about kind of what's behind this report, which asks, the IEA is an energy organization rather than a trade organization. What was the motivation for doing this report that has such a big focus on trade? So perhaps the first question I'll pass to Timur to talk about the EV tariffs in Europe, and then to Araceli for the broader implications, and then the executive director can perhaps explain what was the motivation behind this trade-focused study. So Timur, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jethro. Excellent question and indeed very topical. Maybe just to say that our analysis suggests that these adopted countervailing duties by the EU may not be entirely sufficient to bridge the gap, to discourage all manufacturers from assembling their vehicles in China and importing them in the EU. But having said that, the countervailing import duties will have some short-term impact for companies that are affected. There will be a significantly lower incentive to sell EVs in Europe, meaning that exports might be slowing down. We have included them in our analysis. They're expected to expire after a period of 5 years. So the longer term assessment at this point in time is not that much affected. It is important to recognize, I think, that imports from China accounted for around 20% of EV sales in the European Union already last year. We find that under these today's policy settings, this share roughly doubles to 40% within the next 10 years. But that full integration of supply chains, meaning EV manufacturing, but also battery and components manufacturing, might be able to bring that down significantly. Innovation in new batteries can also play an important role here. Thank you.
Thank you, Timur. And then, so the next question on the broader implications for Europe, if Araceli, you could take that one.
Thanks very much, Jethro. No, very important question as well. So indeed, in the report, we looked at the implications for different economies, as the Executive Director and Dr. Good mentioned, but in particular for Europe, there's very important and major strengths that could be singled out here. Of course, we are not picking winners, but the idea here is more to illustrate some possibilities with the quantitative analysis that we have done. First, to mention that just the Eurozone is the second largest single market in the world. We see a strong emphasis on climate and energy policies that are really driving really strong demand for clean energy technologies and clean materials, which really it's an important precondition for this manufacturing investment to take place. At the same time, we see already that this market size of those clean technologies already is around $120 billion in Europe. This is no longer very far from the $275 billion that are related to the market for internal combustion engines. So again, is reaching very sizable figures here. And of course, we don't have to forget that Europe is a major manufacturing hub. It has a leadership and state-of-the-art techniques when it comes to the automotive sector, when it comes to steel, when it comes to chemicals and pharmaceuticals, and there's a lot of synergies that one could draw from those activities when we think about key clean energy technologies like electric vehicles, batteries, but also electrolysers. So there's a lot of synergies and spillovers to really build on. And of course, not to forget that Europe is an innovation powerhouse, particularly for clean energy technologies, and it's been quite resilient to the high inflation period that we've seen, in particularly when we look at the trends on venture capital funding. So again, a lot of important metrics to consider, and just to illustrate perhaps that when we look at the target and the goals of the Net Zero Industry Act to reach this 40% supply of the domestic market with domestic manufacturing by 2030, what we see in terms of the pipeline for announced manufacturing projects is that the projects that we see already under construction reaching final investment decision for wind, batteries, electrolysers and heat pumps manufacturing could really meet that goal on the Net Zero Industry Act. So there's a lot of positive elements that one could build upon, and just to mention a few here.
Thank you very much, Araceli. And now perhaps Dr. Birol on the motivation behind this report from your point of view.
Now, I tried to explain in the beginning. We at IEA we look at all fuels, all technologies, and the previous ETP reports did confirm that there is a growth in the clean energy technologies. So with this report, we wanted to basically two things. One, to show the world that the manufacturing of these clean technologies will be a major sector in the future. It is a big part of the global economy, so that the countries who are not able to understand how big it will be see these numbers, see these figures, and take their policies, put their policies accordingly. So the size of the clean energy technology manufacturing. The second, we expect, and this is every day we can see, read in the papers, and we will see more in the future, and I believe much more frequently, there will be trade issues between the countries. And these decisions that the governments will take, the trade barriers, the tariffs, the import barriers, should be made on the basis of data. We are just putting the data on the table. As I tried to say, we will not make a prescription for the countries, do this, don't do this, but we just want to show that if you do this, this is the consequences. Just putting the data on the table so that it would hopefully serve to make better decisions for everybody. But I am also thankful, Jetro, that Timur, Araceli, the entire team also look at the countries who are now only producing 5% of the clean energy manufacturing of the 2/3 of the global population, and they will be in a very disadvantaged situation in tomorrow's economy. And in this report, I think my colleagues made an excellent granular analysis how those countries can benefit from the clean energy technology manufacturing, and what are the options, possibilities for them. So many thanks for that contribution as well.
Thank you, Dr. Birol. We've already gone a little bit over time, but I think we can squeeze in just a couple more questions before we finish. So we have one on oversupply. So why would any new entrant be attracted to markets that are oversupplied already, such as solar PV and batteries? And then also a question, kind of, I guess, on new entrants as well, or you know, smaller economies. So major economies like China and the US already have clear advantages in their clean energy manufacturing industries. But what is your advice to smaller, less wealthy economies who want to compete? So perhaps the first question, I'll give that to Timur on oversupply, and then if Araceli can speak a bit about what the options are for the smaller economies. Timur.
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Jethro. And very good question. It's true that installed manufacturing capacity for solar PV and EVs exceeds global demand today, and factories that are under construction are likely to continue to outpace demand growth in the next few years. We find that the current utilization rate of solar factories is around 55%, and for batteries it's around 1/3, so fairly low values. The competition, though, in these sectors is extremely fierce, in particular in China, where much of that manufacturing takes place. There is likely to be some consolidation in these markets moving forward that will favor the bigger players who can withstand the slim margins. But we do still think there's a reason to invest. Let me give two of them, and then probably that's helpful. Most clean energy technologies are actually not uniform commodities, and markets are highly competitive in terms of product quality and differentiation of the characteristics. Companies that can innovate a better product can gain market share very, very quickly here. In fast-growing markets, it is necessary to invest in innovation and experience now in order to be a player in 2030 and beyond. So if a company is particularly innovative, it can withstand these pressures. Second, countries have in some cases specified how markets should be supplied, which creates pockets of undersupply in the near term in particular countries. So there is an opportunity to invest here. So these kind of factors are quite important. And for batteries, maybe also just to say in particular, most of them are sold on long-term contracts with automakers, not on the spot market. And quality here is very, very critical. So again, this creates opportunities for the best manufacturers, the most innovative manufacturers to gain a market share. Back to you, Jethro.
Thank you, Timur. And then perhaps Araceli on a bit more on the opportunities for the smaller economies.
Of course, many thanks, Jethro. This is a very important point indeed, as has been highlighted by the Executive Director and we did in the presentation. There's been a lot of opportunities that we've looked at in terms of clean energy manufacturing in developing markets and developing economies. And of course, for this type of countries where resources are even more limited, it is even more important to play at their strengths and really to focus on those areas where they can make a difference. We have identified many opportunities that are quite interesting when it comes to clean energy manufacturing, and Dr. Good had mentioned a few examples through these regions we've looked into, but certainly it is in these developing and emerging economies where we've seen that there are the most competitive opportunities longer term. And of course, this could have a very interesting benefits when it comes to lowering the overall cost of the energy transition and creating these trade and investment opportunities in terms of relationships across countries that can really underpin longer term the global energy security. Of course, international cooperation is going to be key here to establish these strategic partnerships and to make sure that we can unlock this win-win situation in which on one hand we'll have developing economies really finding clean energy manufacturing as a means to grow their prosperity and also to make sure that they can attract foreign direct investment. At the same time, we see that those countries that will be wealthier would be supporting these investments in developing economies while they will be diversifying, as has been mentioned, so important, this word of diversification, diversifying their clean energy supply chains and making them more resilient. So ultimately here, what we have done in the report is actually to identify 6 key principles that would be good considerations to take into account when defining and developing these strategic partnerships. And just to mention a couple very quickly here, we thought that would be very important to develop this institutional capacity and skills locally in these countries, but at the same time to make sure that these projects that will be developed will contribute to local policy goals as well, to make sure that, again, we have this development as a win-win situation for all parties. So I'll leave it here on that point. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Araceli. And I'm afraid that's all we have time for. We've covered all the main questions and gone a bit over time. If any journalists have any further questions, we invite you to reach out to our press office and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. As Dr. Birol mentioned, this really is a groundbreaking report with a lot of new data and analysis, so we really encourage you to take the time to dig into it and explore all the insights that it contains. It just leaves me to thank once again Dr. Birol, Timur, Araceli, and the journalists for the questions, and to everyone following this launch event online for your interest in our work. A final reminder, the full Energy Technology Perspectives report is available for free on our website, along with some great interactive tools and a data explorer to dig into, so do please take a look. Thank you and goodbye.